Cornelius Larison. Maybe you know about Larison's Corner, in Flemington. Mm-hmm. Anyway, he was so fascinated with her life that he said, you know what, I need to write down her story. So he would go and travel to her cabin way out in the woods of the Sauerlands, and he would do that, and then she would fall asleep because she was an old lady, so he'd have to keep circling back, to catch what she had to tell him about her life. Very interesting things that she pointed out. She talked about being a little tiny slave girl at the Hunt House during the Revolutionary War. She remembered seeing Washington and Lafayette and how they were there, and she would serve them. And she talked about what they ate and how they dressed and how they danced. And even though there has been historians that have tried to debunk what she said, and they said, well, the time frame doesn't match up, and we don't think that she's accurate because it couldn't have happened that way. But you have to understand one thing. Oral history, like I said, is very important in our culture. Mm-hmm. And Sylvia was an illiterate woman. She did not know how to read or write. So you tell me how she would be able to figure all that out if she hadn't witnessed it as a child.
And she was a young child too, and so we have people that say, oh gosh, she would probably only be 6 or 7 years old. Yes, there were child slaves, and they were young, and they would work, and so yes, it could possibly be
have
true.
Been.
And when we say in the Sauerland Mountains, we're really just talking about right at the end of Spring Hill Road and Hollow Road in Skillman, so it's not that far from here. And so we always end up, when we tell you about Sylvia, the name of her book is The Slave That Whipped Her Mistress and Gained Her Freedom.
Yes.
Sylvia died with a scar in the back of her head, a dent, not a scar, in the back of her head that was given to her by her mistress. So the master was away, and now she's in Easton, PA, over that area, over to, well, even further. She was gone through the Susquehanna River over to the other side of Pennsylvania there. And she's there with this wonderful woman that just kept bossing her around and beating her up and everything. And so they're in a tavern, and she hits Sylvia with this coal shovel, and Sylvia beat her up and then turned around to everybody else and said, who's next? So the patrons were like, not me. So then we also end up with telling you, Sylvia, you're telling about Putt's Tavern, which was also in the woods right behind Spring Hill Road. And so, Beverly, you will explain about Putt's Tavern before we close up. Yeah,
Putt's Tavern. I guess the only way you can maybe describe that, it was maybe a speakeasy type of establishment with a lot of drinking and gambling and things that you know that are people were not supposed to be doing, but they were doing it then. So it was a big draw. It was really, very popular.
From New York and
They would come from all over, you know. And she was actually in her prime. She was a bouncer. She was the bouncer in her grandfather's tavern, Putt's Tavern. And actually the remains of the foundation, people say, is still in the Sauerland Mountains. Yeah. And it did burn down, who knows, mysteriously. But anyway, they said that she was an amazingly strong woman and that she could beat any man that came along. As a matter of fact, she was known for knocking a man out with one punch.
And we talk about how these people are the descendants of the people that the man saw when he came through, and he said they're all different shades. Some of them are dark, some of them are light, some of them look white, some of them are tan, and he wanted to know what's going on in this community. So Beverly will finish the article, what it was called.
It was called Barbarianism. Am I pronouncing it right?
I think so.
In the Sauerland Mountain region, the miscegenation taking place in the mountains. And he was talking about how terrible it was that they were race mixing. It was a community that was actually, living perfectly fine of black people. Some were married to white people. There were Indians that all lived there together. They had their community, and this guy that came through on the train as a reporter, getting off to soak in some of the local flavor and talk to some of the locals, when he saw, some of the people from this little community, he was like, well, why do they look like this? Why are they all different colors? And why are white people living in the same place with black people? So it caused quite a stir. in his mind, at least, and he felt constrained that when he got back to New York, he had to write about it. So that was the article that was written
and
about.
And we find it just kind of funny because this is one of the barbarians he was talking about. That's my husband's grandmother. And then I'll let you lean up against that one. And this is another one of the barbarians. And so this man here and some of these people, thank you. Some of these people in the picture, they were peach basket makers right here in our community. There was over in Hunterdon County, and I don't know about here in Hillsborough, but in Hunterdon County, there's said to be 2 million peach trees. And a lot of the peaches went to New York and Philadelphia. It was the first like farm to market. And
huge
so
industry.
People
yes.
have made the baskets and worked on the orchards. And so we always want to show you these pictures here. And our last photo that we will show you is Richard Allen. So Richard Allen he was an enslaved African American, came from Philadelphia, and he was a pastor of the first AME, which is African Methodist Episcopal Church. He started the AME church. The reason why he started it is blacks and whites couldn't worship together, but they did have to take the slaves with them to church. So can you imagine going to church and coming back and find out all your slaves ran away? So they would take them to church and make them sit up in the balcony. And so this man was like, okay, that's enough of this. So him and Absalom Jones, which is another big figure there in Philadelphia, they were kneeling down at the altar at a white church in Philadelphia. And I think it's St. George's. It's in our book. And the people were so appalled because the black people were kneeling down at the altar and they were supposed to be up in the balcony, of which they built the balcony too, by the way. And so they're building the balcony and not knowing why they're building it, and they were building it for themselves. So Richard Allen decides, okay, that's enough of this. I'm going to start my own church. He started the African Methodist Episcopal Church. He comes to Pennington, New Jersey. And after he left, because he stayed here about 6 months with the pastor of the Methodist Church in Pennington. After he left, the Bethel AME Church, which is on Main Street in Pennington, was formed, and the AME Church that we made our museum. We have a Stoutsburg, Sauerland African American Museum, one of the first African American museums in Central Jersey. And so Richard Allen was also in this area. Who knows whether he walked around here? We don't know. I do believe they did, because we're not that far from each other, and people would go from one farm to the next to visit each other. So that's the history of some of the blacks from our community. Thank you.